and then Samyup Lee. And I'm ready to start our panel. So I'm excited to have 4 different perspectives of a public interest career. We have Charles Goldberg from the Deputy Public Guardians, or he's the Deputy Public Guardian at the Office of the Cook County Public Guardian. Susan DeCostanza, who's the Director of Guardian Ad Litem for Adults Program at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services. Andy Kane, who's the Legal Director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And then I kind of went out of order, but Sarah Hess, who's right next to me, who's the Staff Attorney at Legal Counsel for Health Justice. So if we just want to start down the line, starting with Andy, maybe.
Okay.
If you want to introduce yourself, talk about your current position and any relevant past experience leading up to this job.
Sure. So I'm the legal director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. For those that aren't familiar with our organization, we've been around for 25 years here in Chicago. We have affiliates in DC, Atlanta, San Francisco, and LA. And we're basically a Asian American social justice organization. We do a lot of advocacy and lobbying on behalf of marginalized communities in different Asian communities in Chicagoland. I've been on staff for, I'm coming on 6 years now. Prior to that, I did work down in Springfield with an agency called the Legislative Reference Bureau. It's a nonpartisan agency that those attorneys are responsible for drafting all the legislation, good and bad, that the General Assembly chooses to present or consider. Let's see, I'm trying to think what else. My current job, my primary areas of focus are around immigrant rights. So believe it or not, there's a lot of state and local laws or policies that you can put in place that definitely benefit immigrants, both undocumented and legal. And as well as the area of voting rights. So automatic voter registration, maybe something you've heard in the news. Our organization has been co-leading that effort, and we expect the governor to sign that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'll just leave it at that. You know, I should caveat right now up front that all of my advice would be what not to do. My legal career is a bit of a journeyman's legal career, kind of all over the place, starting in big law and then kicking around in various different roles. So I guess if there's a silver lining, if that ends up being you at some point, it's going to be okay. You will find your bearings eventually.
So I'm Susan Lepeau DeCostanza. As Brent mentioned, I'm the director of the Guardian Ad Litem for Adults program at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services. So the court appoints my organization to be GAL for adults in adult guardianship cases. So where there's an individual with a disability and for some reason or another, someone else would like to become guardian because they believe that this individual is unable to make personal or financial decisions. And so frequently the court will appoint a GAL to protect that person's rights, interests, make sure that this is the proper course of action. So that's my job now. I've been at CVLS for a little over 7 years. And before I was an attorney at Chicago Volunteer Legal Services, I was a PILI intern there. So it's a great way to get a job through your current kind of work and the connections that you're making now. Before I even kind of stepping backwards, in undergrad I studied education, and it wasn't till kind of probably the very end of college when I thought maybe I'd like to go to law school, and I took a number of years off, and I spent some time abroad doing a sort of Peace Corps type. It wasn't the Peace Corps, but an international volunteer program for 2.5 years in Peru. I learned Spanish. I also highly recommend learning another language if you want to do legal services. It's very valuable for any agency that you might want to be a part of. And then when I came back to the United States, I did use my education degree both in Peru and then here a little bit. I worked at CPS for about a year or so before I went to law school. I always knew that I wanted to do public interest law, but I wasn't necessarily sure exactly what kind of path that might be. I've spent a lot of time at CVLS doing guardian ad litem for children work as well. So I feel really lucky that I think both with working with kids and also with adults with disability, kind of my education background, you know, when you think about the training that you get in special education, child development and all of that, I feel really lucky that I got to use some of that training in my legal career. I think that's a rarity and I'm glad for that. And then after law school, I graduated in 2008 when everything was bursting, and it was very difficult to get employment, which it still is, I understand. But so I also had a bit of a winding road for a short period of time. I worked part-time at my law school running their pro bono and volunteer program. And the other half of my time I was working with a civil rights law firm on a contract basis. So I kind of split my time until I found a job as a public interest career counselor at Chicago Kent Law School, and I had worked in the career services office at my law school as well. So I got to do that for a couple of years and work with students that were interested in, building their public interest career. And then I continued to volunteer with CVLS. So I'll tell you more about my organization, but we are the oldest, largest pro bono organization in Illinois. So we're a small staff. There's only about 12 attorneys on staff, but we're always working with between 2,000 and 3,000 volunteer attorneys that take cases with us on a pro bono basis. So while I was barred but not practicing law full time, I continued to take volunteer cases with CVLS, and then they had a position open, and so I applied and I joined CVLS about 7 years ago.
So I'm Charles Goldberg. I'm a deputy at the Cook County Public Guardian's Office. We have three main practice areas. We represent children in child abuse cases in juvenile court, and we also represent children in some of the most hotly contested custody battles in domestic relations court. And the division I supervise is adult guardianship. We're the last resort public guardian appointed for adults, mostly older adults with disabilities who need a guardian and who have no appropriate family to be their guardian. And so my career path was also a little winding, I guess, and it also started in big law. I started at a large law firm here, and that firm participated in the PILI fellowship program, and I was able to work at the public guardianship, the public guardian's office over the summer through a PILI fellowship sponsored by my firm. And then when I went back to my firm, I took some cases with me from the public guardian's office that I handled pro bono. And then when those cases were all resolved, there was a staff attorney opening at the public guardian's office that I applied for and that I got, and that was about 25 years ago, and I've been at the public guardian's office ever since. And over that time, I've been able to work in all of our practice areas and also appeals and special litigation. And now I direct the adult guardianship division.
Great. Hi, I'm Sarah Hess. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Council for Health Justice. I went to law school knowing that I wanted to do public interest, but not really clear on exactly what that would look like. I started in education law, thinking about education equity, and as I was looking at education, it sort of overlapped with issues of poverty and homelessness and housing instability. So then I looked at housing, then I looked at poverty, looked at immigration, interned in all of these different areas as well, and did my PILI internship at Shriver in 2013. And what I concluded was that I didn't want to do one area of law. I wanted to look at how all of these different practice areas overlap and intersect in ways that keep kids from succeeding. And so I learned about medical legal partnership, which is a concept where lawyers and medical providers in some context come together to look at social determinants of health. So that was the dream job, I realized, and put forward an application to the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to put in a joint application for a Skadden Fellowship, which is a 2-year post-grad fellowship to do some kind of public interest work that's supposed to be innovative and boundary pushing. Medical legal partnership kind of fit into that nicely. So I did a partnership with Erie Family Health. It's a federally qualified health center here in Chicago, through the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So I was focused on Erie's school-based health centers, doing civil legal aid. So all kinds of civil legal aid issues for a couple of years, and then legal counsel hired me to start a new medical legal partnership at UIC. So instead of sort of a typical doctor-focused medical legal partnership, we're working with care coordinators and community health workers to identify kids with chronic illness who could use civil legal aid. that's my position, and there are a couple others that are similar at Legal Counsel for Health Justice. We have another partnership focused on kids with behavioral health issues, and then a third focused on Friend Family Health Center, and we provide mostly special education representation to them. But Legal Counsel has two other programs. We've got HOP, which is the Homeless Outreach Project, and they work with adults experiencing homelessness who are dealing with co-occurring mental health and substance abuse issues. And Jasmine's on that project. Are you on that? Okay, and our other project, and Rachel works with me on CMLPC. Jasmine works on our third program, which is AIDS Legal Counsel of Chicago. And they've been doing work in Chicago for 30 years this December, serving clients who are HIV positive. So those are sort of the three programs at Legal Counsel for Health Justice.
So, I mean, I'm also open to taking your questions for the panelists if you have any. So think about some questions that you want to ask and I'll go to you guys. But first, a lot of people say that the skills that you learn from being an attorney, you learn after law school. But what kind of things can law students do now to kind of start that process outside of law school that they're not being taught? Anyone?
I think we should snake for equity, you know.
Sure. I would say working in direct services during law school is really important, right? Trying to get an understanding of what it's like to really work with clients, I think is important and something that you build on. So that's a skill that you can actually begin through your internships in school. It is really different practice from school. I think the other part of it is just like being self-sufficient, right? And not being told what to do, but really thinking creatively about the problem in front of you and not waiting for the assignment or waiting for guidance on that, but really thinking about it independently and how you can make things better. Is something you could start now, but that it's really different from post-school.
I concur with all that. I would add two things. One is related to the point about clerkships because it relates to direct client service right away now, and that would be through your law clinics. And also trial advocacy. I can tell which of our newer lawyers have taken trial advocacy and which haven't. I think that's very beneficial.
I would say, similarly to what Sarah mentioned, I think get as much experience now with as many different employers now as you can. Don't overdo it. Don't stretch yourself. But you already know that the summer internships are highly coveted and can be competitive to get, especially kind of paid position or a position that has funding from some source. But let me just tell you, because it's crazy in my office right now, it's wonderful. We have interns and fellows bustling about, but let me tell you that September 1, it will be a ghost town. And when we have interns that come in during the school year, let me just tell you, you shine. You stand out. You're the only person getting all the attorney's attention. It's fantastic. It's amazing. You can, even in a smaller organization like mine, like even if you're kind of assigned to one practice area, you might even be able to branch out and do some work in some of the other practice areas because not every, group has their own designated intern, and you're not kind of treading on someone else's ground. So I think there's lots of reasons because it can help you build skills, but also because you're kind of showing your good work to as many individuals that will be your future advocates as possible. I similarly did not take this. This is advice that I learned from doing it the wrong way. It was fine for me, but I ended up working at Chicago Volunteer Legal and Services during the summer, and then they invited me to stay, and I was thinking of going to the Public Guardian, and I was like, well, they want me to stay, I should stay. And I did, but later I was like, no, I should have branched out, and again, I'm very pleased with where I am now, but I do sort of think I missed out on an opportunity, perhaps to work with Chuck. So that's my advice. There may be paid positions in the fall that you don't know about because they're not as widely kind of out there as others. You can get credit, so drop a class. I mean, if it works for you and your schedule, but drop a class and get credit so that you're not overburdened. Again, don't do work where you're gonna, like, don't stretch yourself so thin that you're gonna do bad work. That would be counterproductive. But there are lots of ways to make it happen, and, you know, send me your resume. Come work with me.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this specifically to the type of work that I do now, which is a very niche work. In fact, I don't think in law school they teach you how to draft legislation. I don't think anybody teaches you necessarily how to lobby a legislator, although negotiations comes in a little bit. So, you know, just to really briefly, I kind of didn't describe my journeyman career. I went to big law in Boston for 2 years, came back in a mid-size in Chicago, kind of knew private was just not for me. Ended up trying out for the FBI, and you know, God would see it that telling the truth and the polygraph just don't mix. So I did have my offer of employment, and that was where I was going to go. For those of you that are interested in law enforcement, a law degree definitely helps on that level, so that's something to consider. But that wasn't in the cards for me, and so I did end up working down in Springfield for 3 years. You know, I'd say the skills that came most in handy doing this job in particular. And so when I look at resumes of people that we're considering, like, wow, you know, right now we only have one legal fellow in addition to our PILI fellow, we're not necessarily looking at the same things that others are looking for. We are looking for specific experiences that, like, tell me that you have some base set of skills that would make you good for this particular job. Because this is very different than direct legal services or trying to build a case. A lot of this, I would argue, you could be a non-lawyer to do, but I have not seen non-lawyers be super effective in this capacity, right? But the type of things that would come super in handy to do if you're interested in doing policy advocacy or moving an issue, or my other area is voter protection, running a poll watching operation and making sure that the voting rights of folks in a nonpartisan way are looked after. One is volunteering, obviously being a poll watcher, comfortable with that kind of work, and you understand the different issues that arise on election day. But I would also say that what would greatly enhance your law school experience is going to organizer training. I mean, I know everyone, since President Obama became president, everyone's like, I want to be an organizer, I want to do this. There is a difference between being an activist and being an organizer. And that's not to in any way disparage what being an activist is, but an activist, there is definitely a role for that. But an organizer, you're not just marching, you're building a campaign around a particular issue. You're trying to reach a specific solution. That could take anywhere from 1 to 2 years. It could be 30 days. It just really depends on how big you go, right? So doing a training like that, and then potentially finding out what local issues there are, whatever it is that drives you or moves you, and getting involved. Even if it's in a small way, just so that you're exposed to what issue campaigns look like. They have their own tempo, and it's very different than electoral politics, where you get on a political campaign and the end-all be-all is did your candidate win, right? That's a very different thing, and those folks that are geared towards partisan work are designed a little bit differently as far as what they're paying attention to. So, you know, those are the type of experiences I think will help you build a lot of soft skills that will complement your legal knowledge.
And just to Susan's point, and to do a little plug, PILI does have 8 internship spots at different agencies in the fall and spring, if you're thinking about doing an internship during the school year. Any questions for panelists? Sure.
I have a question. Organizing and activism, you said that they're 2 different things. Do you think the 2 can be like combined to be successful at the work that you do?
Yeah, no, definitely. Look,
Andy,
I mean,
can I just repeat the question? Just
yeah,
for
sure.
So, can you combine the work of advocacy and
Activism and organizing.
activism and organizing? Sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, just to clarify, and I think these are my definitions. I think potentially you fill a room of organizers or activists, they're all going to have different language potentially, but I think activism is oftentimes the first step to becoming an organizer or getting involved with organizing. It's just organizing is much more time intensive. You have a lot more ownership over the work, right? Like activism, I could show up at a march for a friend's cause, right? And that's lending my body, my support, you know, and visibly, you know, being there in solidarity. Whereas being an organizer is like, okay, I'm going to recruit 50 people to recruit 10 people each, and we're going to have a march. And that fits in, that march is a tactic within a larger strategy to exert pressure on a particular alderman or the mayor to do X, Y, Z, right? And then feeling responsible for not just the outcome of that march, but making sure that you end up somewhere close to where you wanted to be, right? And so it's a lot more work. You know, and back in the day before, pre-Obama and even before then, before all these nonprofits, which are great, I'm not going to disparage nonprofits, most organizers had regular jobs and they did this on their off time. There's still a lot of those folks out there, right? It's absolutely a complete privilege in our generation that you can be a paid organizer and do that full time. So not that those jobs are plentiful, but that the fact that they exist at all is really a difference than what we've seen, like, say, you know, when I was younger.
Sure.
I think, Susan, you're the one that mentioned taking trial ad. So would you recommend taking trial ad, like, as opposed to taking a course that you don't know whether or not you have interest in, like patent law, or a bar course, like maybe some people are like, Barbie could do a job for that?
I think it was, yeah, I think it was Charles. I can answer too, though. You go ahead and go first if you'd like.
So the question was about trial ad and when to take it.
So this is just my own thing. I do not recommend taking classes just because that subject's on the bar. You'll learn it in Barbary. You don't need to take the class. And then doing clinic as opposed to taking substantive area classes you're interested in, I think that's kind of a false dichotomy. When I was in law school, I think I was able to take most of the substantive classes that I was interested in taking, and also have clinic as an opportunity. But that might be because I consciously did not take classes for the reason that it would be on the bar.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have anything to
Yeah.
add or different?
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of ways to get to get exposure to the type of law that you may or may not be interested in, and so I think it's all just sort of balancing. I also took classes because I was afraid of the bar exam, and I think that everyone is different, and you have to like kind of make your own evaluation. But speaking from the other end, I also would have done that differently. I would not have just taken secure transactions simply because it's not that there wasn't any valuable information in that course or anything, but I think that I certainly got enough information from bar prep, all the money I was paying to bar prep. You know, you're paying a ton of money to your law school, you're paying a ton of money for bar prep, like they're going to do their job, or the consumer is not going to be happy. And then I think, you know, you could do an internship in an area that you're not interested in, or that you may or may not be interested in, or you could find an internship where maybe it's what you're doing is in one particular group, but they also do that other work. So you're kind of building relationships and finding out about what that's like and observing. Or your law schools are chock full of panels all the time, you know, bringing in amazing people doing all these fantastic things across the board. So in my personal experience, I would not have taken a bar prep course during law. I would go back and change that, but I also think everyone's a little different. So.
I would add one thing, because I think when it comes to the practical courses where you're actually practicing the action of it, like trial ad, for instance, I wouldn't avoid those, right? I think that's like where you actually get a chance to do it, where in an internship you may not get a chance to stand up in court. And I'm a recommender always of the intensive courses. So I took trial ad here at John Marshall over 10 days. Which was real intense. I kept falling asleep with the lights on during those 2 weeks. It was tough. But I would go in and each day get feedback from the day before, and so I was able to really like apply what I was learning through that course.
So there are a lot of preconceptions about public interest attorneys. Can you speak to any of those that you had in your mind maybe before graduating or even in your first couple of years? And you know, what myths did you find to be inaccurate? Susan, do you want to start to put you on the spot?
Well, I mean, one that pops in, I don't know if this is a common misconception or if it's just me, but I think one thing that pops into my head is that, you know, I think we live in a big well, at least for the summer, and maybe for longer you live in a big city. It's a big sort of like liberal city. And so maybe one misconception is that all public interest attorneys are super progressive and all activists. And that is not the case in any way, shape, or form in my experience. And so I think that a lot of the sort of career and professionalism advice that you get across the board is going to be applicable to public interest law. So just because you're going to interview for a summer job or a staff attorney position or something at a civil legal services provider, for example, necessarily, and kind of let all of your most extreme views, put them all out there on the table. And it's not that you can't feel that out, that situation, but just the same way that you would fill out any interview or any employer, and kind of like figure out what's going on there, and make yourself, ingratiate yourself to those people. All the people skills that you use across the board would be applicable. Even in public interest law, we have all sorts of intergenerational relationships and conflicts or lack thereof, that happen again kind of in other employment arenas as well. So just something to keep in mind.
Anyone else?
Are there questions about, like, I think this about this
Yeah.
kind of public interest
This
law
would be a good
attorney?
test questions, yeah.
Yeah. And we could say, yes, in my experience, that's true or not.
I mean, I've had questions from you guys about finances, and like what a starting salary is, and whether, if it really is as low as they say, stuff like that.
Yep.
And I think that depends, right, on where you are, of course. I know I saw some new grad attorney positions going for 33 last year. That's tough.
That's really,
That's pretty low. I'd say that's not typical,
Yeah.
right?
And maybe a bit of an injustice.
Yeah,
It's a little low, yeah.
For a social justice oriented organization.
Yeah. But I think more like, so I can talk about EJW and Skadden, for instance. So EJW, I think, is at 46 now for the 2-year post-grad fellowship. And Skadden went up to 52 2 years ago for starting, which I think is very good and maybe also not typical.
Yeah. Yeah, salaries are not, you're not going into this work for the salary, and I think it'd be slightly different. So there's also a sort of campaign maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago in Chicago, and maybe even broader across Illinois, where some of the legal aid foundations were kind of pushing legal aid attorneys or legal aid organizations to get the legal aid attorney staff positions up to the point where they matched our government counterpoints, just as like a sort of goal, and like towards fundraising, helping them with fundraising and things like that. And so I do think that there's a range, because then the bubble burst, firms stopped hiring, everything went crazy, and so that campaign sort of dropped off, and some of the commitments that agencies had made kind of understandably fell by the wayside or were reprioritized. But I do think that, so all across Chicago, the agencies kind of fell in different places along that commitment that they had made 10 years ago. And so I think there's a range, and it's okay to kind of do your homework when you're thinking about employment and try and figure out what'll work for you.
Sure. I think this is sort of a conception that I've had about public interest law and just like public interest work, and we're sort of speaking to the fact that salaries are kind of low. To me, it seems like public interest work, and not to to overgeneralize it, but in order to go into public interest work, you have to be able to afford it, right? And so there's like a level of privilege that comes along with being a public interest attorney, but yet you're dealing with clients that are nowhere remotely close to the level of privilege that their advocators are, the level that they're at. And so there is talk now where, is loan forgiveness going to be a thing, right? I think there's a couple lawsuits going on. There's very limited public interest jobs, and this is not really a question, but at least this is sort of my conception of public interest work, whether that be attorneys or social workers or anyone in this area that's taken that cut, because generally they have a safety net if thing hits the fan, whether that be a relative or a significant other. So I know that's not really a question, but that was kind of,
Yeah, I would say that's, to me, that sounds accurate. I think what you're seeing though is that there are some groups that are putting out templates of how to be a community lawyer, right? So how to go straight to being, a solo practitioner. If you want to do a particular type of law and you can't find a spot that pays, at a particular organization, maybe it is going to mean you're bartending and you're doing landlord-tenant cases in your neighborhood, right, on the side, right? And so, I had this friend who went into acting, right? Went to Hollywood, and he actually lucked out into a TV role. But he said, do you want to be a movie star, like a TV star, or do you want to be an actor? Like, do you enjoy the work, right? And so, I think it's figuring out what makes you tick, what drives you, what kind of public interest law, what issues you want to address, and how you want to address them, right? You can do it the policy side, or you could do it helping clients and families, right, which has an immediate payoff that I sometimes am jealous of. But figuring that out, and then you can, once you know what you want to be, figuring out how to get there, there's multiple ways of doing that. But I think previously, maybe in law school, sometimes we're told that there's only a few ways of getting there, right? And I think given the way the landscape has shifted, new ways are going to have to be figured out.
And there already are. It's a really exciting time to it's the traditional sort of legal aid attorney or government attorney is those were, I think even just 10 years ago, those were the public interest paths. And there's so many others now. The Justice Entrepreneurship Program, every one of you should look at that. And just to see what is going on, it is exciting as a legal aid attorney when I can say, yes, today we turned away 100 people from legal services simply because we don't have the resources to provide it for them. But we have these amazing referrals of people who are actually making money, they're making a living because they have to. Maybe they have not just, a kid, but maybe they even have other generations in their family depending on them. And so they sort of have to, and they're making it work financially for themselves. These are individuals who are starting their own law firms with the public interest mission statement. They're for-profit organizations, but they, some of them, I've seen some models where they can do 70% pro bono work and bank money off of 30% of their cases, and it's still profitable. It's still enough to pay the bills. And then others are in varying kind of forms of that. And then just another thing to think about, if any of you are interested in elder law at all, the population is aging, and I work with, so many incredibly generous probate attorneys that do guardianship, probate, wills and estates, trusts, and they have their private firm. They all have their private firms, but they all do they're expected by the judges to do so much pro bono, and they do so much pro bono voluntarily on their own, even without the expectation. And their law firms are growing, and they're continuing to be profitable because their clientele is always growing, and they can't keep up with the work. So, I mean, even just thinking about maybe elder law is something I want to do because I know that I'll probably be able to do both of the things that I want to do, or makes enough money to support the people that I need to support until I can maybe then move into a career a little bit later.
I would add too that, you're all in law school, right? So it's too late. But but as you pass on your advice to people considering law school, thinking strategically, right? Any of us without money have to be strategic about what we're going to do, right? So for me, I came to John Marshall because I got a full scholarship. Whereas I learned later, had I gone to other Chicago public interest schools, there's a great public interest loan assistance program at those other schools, right? So there are ways to piece that together that I think you have to be strategic about from the start.
Question? Did you?
Yeah. So you talked about finding the thing that kind of makes you tick, and let's say it's public interest at large, but there's a specific area like domestic violence or something that you want to go into. If we're three of us looking for jobs right now, do you recommend holding out for that specific area of interest that we really care about, or is it at this point you get a public interest job, you take that public interest job?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes to your risk
Andrew,
tolerance.
let me just repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
Just
Keep forgetting. Sorry, folks online.
But no, you're fine. But just so that, so for those looking for a job in the public interest, if you find that job, do you take it or do you hold out for your dream job?
Yeah, so I was just going to say it depends on your risk tolerance, which is what my financial advisor always tells me. You know, I have a very good friend, one of my best friends, who does deportation defense up in Minnesota. Went to big law, then just couldn't do it any longer, and you know, chose to do immigration, but a specific type of immigration, specifically deportation defense. He had to, he basically worked at NIJC unpaid for, gosh, the better part of a year. Like, so like a super volunteer basically, right? Now he chose to do that, and that was not easy, but it was because he was all in committed to that one thing. No guarantee that there would actually be a paid spot eventually for him. So happened that one was opened up for him because he did such a great job with that work, but not everyone's gonna be able to do that, right? What I would say though on the flip side is try to get close, like at least within a, you know, if you open your sphere on the issue, like hopefully it's related, right? Because, and the reason I say that is one of the perceptions I had of public interest that I think actually turned out to be true, and I understand why it's so justified, is we have, there's this perception that we maybe, you know, misconception that public interest lawyers don't put in the same hours that big law folks do, right? That is absolutely
misconception.
that is absolutely not true. In fact, you probably put in more hours than you would if you're built for public interest, because it's what gets you going, right? Like I've never on my off time thought like, oh, maybe I didn't handle that doc review project right, you know. That's never like invaded my personal time. Whereas like now, you know, I constantly space out, you know, when my wife is trying to talk to me, I'm like, oh, maybe I should have, you know, gone to that legislator and said this, and then, you know, I get in trouble, right? And so I think because of that, these spots are so precious, and we know they are, and it absolutely is a privilege. When we have to interview or consider investing time in somebody that potentially would be our replacement down the road, we need to know that this is their thing, right? This is what's going to get you going. Now, maybe you're honest and you're not completely sure, and I think we appreciate that. But when it's totally not your thing and you know it, that can be extremely deflating to the organization, that you poured all that time and energy into that individual, and then they're not even in the sphere of your community. Because, you know, if my legal fellow, one of my legal fellows right now will probably go end up doing deportation defense. It's not exactly what I do, but it is still in the immigrant rights arena, and I feel like that network is still there. And it's, so to me, like, it's never going to be considered a wasted investment or a loss, you know, for the type of work that I'm trying to promote, right? But if you're totally off, I think that would be a tougher call, right?
Any other?
Yeah, I would just say that I don't necessarily think it's either or. It's not one or the other. I think exactly what you said about I think that all sorts of organizations are used to know that it's hard to kind of get a job right off the bat doing exactly what you want to be doing. You're like, I've landed. So there are paths, and so when you think out your path and possible ways that it might go, and then stay within that, I think there's sort of like an opening up. And you know, even I was just going back to like sort of immigration stuff. I have a colleague who's super passionate about immigration law and ended up doing kind of more general state civil legal services, but then built up relationships with immigrant attorneys here, or I'm sorry, immigration attorneys at immigrant serving organizations here in Chicago. She ended up serving on one of the boards, and like she ended up doing a project with them and kind of partnering in her current role with them. So I don't think that it has to be one or the other necessarily.
Chuck or Sarah, any other perspectives or?
Well, I think if you work a lot, there's no bad internship. I worked from start to finish through law school. I think I had like 13 positions or something silly. Which, when Susan said don't go overkill, like that's what that was. I was a crazy person for 3 years. But it really gave me a sense of what I wanted to do, and none of it was a waste of time. And then it did help me. I felt like each semester I had a better sense of if I was going to be looking at two different options, which one I wanted to take.
So I'm sure that everyone in this room has been to a panel or talked about interviewing skills and what to do in an interview, what to do after an interview. What like public interest specific or just general advice that is also applicable to a public interest job, do you have to give?
Are we starting
Sure,
with me?
or you can,
You're
I was
all-
waiting to see who would bite, but
Yeah.
if you want to start.
So I had, we interviewed, or I was part of an interview process where the person told us clearly and articulately what she didn't like about her previous position, and it felt wrong.
Yeah.
But now I think about that all the time when I work with her, and I like try to not do that, and I think she has higher job satisfaction. So it cuts both ways. I mean, it's always a judgment call, but it came off not so great. But in the end, I think I appreciate her honesty is where I'm going with that.
Charles?
So if you were to talk to the people in my office who do a lot of interviewing, I think they might each have different things that they're looking for. But I can tell you for me, when I meet people I'm interviewing, I'm looking for people I feel are really going to sweat for a client, sweat for that case, go that extra mile, stay late, be passionate, be motivated, the fire in the belly. I'm looking for that. And I'm also looking for a strong, obviously demonstrated commitment to public interest law. And it doesn't have to be necessarily exactly the position we're hiring them for, but a commitment to public interest law in general. And the closer it is to what we do, the better. And so some of my observations might sound obvious, but it's amazing how many people come into interviews not prepared. It still amazes me that I'll interview somebody and it's very clear very early on they haven't even looked at our websites.
Yeah.
Just do research, understand what the organization does, have an idea of some of their highlights in the past recent period of time that they're proud of, what kind of work they do, what courts they practice in, the size of the organization. Just if somebody hasn't looked at our website and they're interviewing, it's almost a waste of time. Oh yes, and again, I hope this doesn't sound too obvious, but it's remarkable what people have on publicly accessible social media.
Oh, yeah.
It's really remarkable. So be sure whatever's publicly accessible about you reflects the professional person and the committed person and the serious person that you are.
I think, again, very sort of typical interview advice, you're making a personal connection. I think that, your commitment to kind of serving others in our line of work is going to be important, but you're also going to be competing against many other people who have a clear demonstrated commitment as well. And again, it's part of this is just doing your homework. Reach out to your networks that you have now. Do you have a colleague at law school who interned at this place call them up. What's it like to work there? What are they looking for? What's the work atmosphere like? I work at a little bit, again, it's not tiny, but a smaller organization. So I would say even more at my organization, they want someone who's got to fit in, and so kind of just any chance you can to make, small talk or ask a question about all of your interviewers just to kind of try and figure out how to make those personal connections is going to help make you memorable. The person's going to go away. This is another thing I've heard kind of career guides say before, people make illogical decisions all the time. So even if you're slightly less qualified than another candidate, if they're like, nope, this is going to work, they have a good work ethic and they don't have all the training, but they're clearly going to fit in well, that's the person that I want to work with for the next 5 years, not the person who it might be a little more like this or we're not quite sure, even though they have the specific training. We can train someone, to do our work. And then ask good questions. Ask good questions, meaning, I was just talking about kind of asking questions in a personal connection kind of way, but ask, good questions about the organization and the work and where your interviewer fits into that work and where the organization fits into the broader community and ask good questions. That shows that you've done your research too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to that. Our work is mostly lobbying. My work is mostly lobbying, right, and advocacy. So if you haven't done any research on me, even though I'm the person that's going to be interviewing you, that already shows that you maybe not inclined for this type of work, right? Because it's pretty easy to find people that have worked at our organization, to your point, and know what we're like, what we've been working on. I'm sure a slew of former fellows and interns would be more than happy to share what it's like to work for me. Hopefully it's all good. But as an example, one of my legal interns right now is actually incoming 1L, which is not something we've ever done before. But he interned at my Atlanta affiliate and lobbied the executive director of Atlanta to call me and ask if I would consider taking a legal intern this summer, even though he was an incoming 1L. That is impressive, okay? I just would say that that's not something that would have ever crossed my mind going into law school, but something that he did, and just, he had read our website and didn't know everything about what we were doing, but on top of that, that just shows a level of initiative as far as showing the desire, to your point, about wanting to work in a particular place, right? It wasn't us or, the ACLU, right? It was, he wanted to work here, and so that makes a difference.
Sure.
I got a question. As far as like LinkedIn, and I'm always kind of confused with this. It's like if you can have access to someone and you find out who's interviewing you, if you try to view their LinkedIn account, it shows that you view their profile, and that seems like that could be a little bit weird, or is that a good thing?
No, go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to share something that's borderline stalkerish, but when I'm lobbying a legislator, so the question of the people online was like, do you look up their entire bio, the person you're interviewing with on LinkedIn? You absolutely do. I mean, when there's a legislator I don't know and I haven't met before, not only do I call everyone that I know that may have met with that legislator, I YouTube them, I read everything online about them, because I don't even want to just know about their life. I want to know how they speak. Like how did they carry themselves in a conversation, so that I know how to adjust and anticipate the way that they're gonna. Is this someone that interrupts people a lot? Is this someone that's dead quiet, and if you don't fill that space, all those things. That's all kind of social intelligence that will help you with your interview, right? It is a little bit stalkerish though, but it's okay.
Acceptable.
Brave new world.
Stalking.
Someone told me when I was in law school, applying for things, to never waste an attorney's time. And this goes to everything that you've just heard, right? So every time I would approach an attorney, I would also be thinking about some way that I could maybe help them, or like bring up an article that they may not have heard because I spent 8 hours researching for my interview, and maybe they didn't spend that much time yet on this project, or whatever. But sort of thinking about making yourself valuable to people.
Let's shift and talk a little bit about the public interest community and some networking. Do you have any recommendations for building your network, or talking about how you're involved in public interest organizations or the public interest community as a whole? Charles, let's start with you. I don't think that we've started with you yet.
Oh, okay. So, well, Chicago has a very rich, diverse public interest law community, and PILI, staying active in PILI is a good way to stay connected. PILI fellow and intern alums in Chicago in many ways is a who's who of the public interest bar in Chicago. So just through being a PILI alum is a powerful networking tool. And then in law school, all the student groups, find the student groups that align with your interests, the environmental group, and so forth. Those are going to be future networks of yours. And same thing with all your clerkships. We talked about doing lots of clerkships in areas that interest you, and the people you meet, stay connected with them, stay in touch with them, stay in touch with each other. In 5 years, one of you will be at an immigration firm and have a landlord-tenant issue, and one of your cohorts in this room will be a top landlord-tenant lawyer at that point. And we'll, yeah.
Anyone else have anything else to say?
Yeah, I think there's lots of groups that you can be a part of. There's bar associations. There's, you can. There's PILI. I've been on committees to work towards a particular goal, like a sort of practice area type commission or committee. And I think that those will look for them. You will find them. They're everywhere. They're always looking for members and sort of volunteers. But also, I think my advice is like get in, and if it's not a good use of your time, just get out. If it's not a committee that's actually doing something, even if it sounds good, the name is good, like get out and go spend your time with another organization that's more active or that is kind of more in line with what your interests are. That's my advice.
Yeah, I mean, I'll work backwards. I'd say with like networking events or quote unquote networking events. And you just, my observation is that lawyers, we can sometimes be kind of socially awkward people, right? And that's why the alcohol is there for a lot of folks, right? But I think one thing I've observed, and I've seen this even with partners who aren't great at networking, they just ground it out and that's how they may partner, is when you go into a space, networking means you're actually going to try to make a new connection with somebody, right? It means that you have some idea of, and it doesn't have to be super Machiavellian. We're not talking like House of Cards here. It's just, I want to meet someone who, is involved in the area of law that I'm interested in, right? And making that connection and exchanging cards or getting their card and then following up with them, not 2 months later, but like hopefully within a week or maybe even the next day, because staying on somebody's radar, I've lost count in the number of times where I've gotten an email from a law student or a potential fellow, and then I just get buried in work, right? And it's a long time before I can actually respond or make the time to meet or have a conversation with that person. But if you don't stay on me, like it is going to disappear on my plate because it's very difficult to carve out that time. So networking is definitely a skill that folks, it's not like something that necessarily comes naturally unless you're super extrovert and very charismatic. It does take some work to intentionally try to force yourself to put yourself out there and make those new connections.
And volunteer. So I work at a volunteer-based organization. You are going to be building relationships with judges if you volunteer. You're going to be building relationships with other attorneys in the same practice area that are opposing counsel. And you may even want to consider, this sounds crazy, but you may even want to consider, even if you are working at a public interest organization, volunteering at another public interest organization. Brent is a shining example. He worked at One Legal Aid and he volunteered with us, and we love him. We could not say enough good things about Brent at CVLS, and we're like, how is he doing this? He works at a legal aid and his plate is full and we know it, but his reputation now precedes him, so
And
volunteer.
actually, it helped me get my job at PILI. Someone from CVLS put in a good word for me here.
So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, to plug volunteering is better than an interview. Like, if I'm interviewing someone that's already volunteered for us, I'm largely basing my decision on what I already know about that person, right? It's just a totally different comfort level.
And I, because law school is so crazy time-wise, I tried to angle everything I did towards the career part. So, and I also had a rule that everything had to serve at least 2, but preferably 3 purposes. And so I wanted to know Renee Hayback from Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. So I wrote my law review comment on something that she had talked about concerning some legislation about the definition of homeless, right? So everything I did, every paper I wrote, I had some kind of slant, or we formed the Public Interest Law Council here at John Marshall so that we could get attorneys who we thought were amazing to come and talk to our group. Yeah. So things like that, you can really use all of your school experiences to connect with other people.
So on that note, I think we'll wrap up. So one way to talk to other new attorneys is coming to the happy hour. I have the list of people who've registered, and there's a lot of people who are, it's first 10, and we've already had 20 non-PILI interns, not fellows, like real people who are working in public interest careers sign up. So that's one way to talk to them. So I want to thank all our panelists. I hope that was beneficial. I don't see a lot of blue papers in front here, so please grab an evaluation and fill that out and sign in if you haven't on your way out. Thank you.
That went fast.
Yeah, I know, right?
All right. Now we hopefully it's not raining.
I know, I hope not.